The Witness is Netflix's latest true crime miniseries and focuses on the tragic murder of Rachel Nickell, which was a huge case in the UK during the early 90s. Public interest in true crime cases has ballooned in recent years, with it becoming one of the most popular genres in film and television. However, it's not always done well, with some almost glamorising the crimes and those that committed them, whilst also ignoring the damaging impact on those affected. But when it comes to The Witness, that is certainly not the case. So in today's video, I'm going to be discussing why The Witness is true crime done right. And just for a heads up, this discussion will contain major spoilers. So, Rachel Nickell was a 23-year-old British mother who was stabbed to death in London on July 15th, 1992. This was one of the most high-profile cases in the last few decades, due to its brutality, the fact Rachel's 2-year-old son survived, as well as the controversial police investigation. And firstly, one of the main reasons why I appreciated The Witness is due to how authentic it feels. Not everything we see is exactly how it happened in real life, but it never feels over-dramatised or exaggerated. It still feels grounded in reality, mainly due to its sombre tone. The case was dramatic enough without needing to embellish the story to a ridiculous level, where it starts to feel in poor taste. Whilst undoubtedly engaging, The Witness isn't made purely for our entertainment. It's meant for so much more than just cheap thrills. It's there to explore how grief can tear a family apart, and the human cost of the crime, as well as the police mishaps. It's handled in a mature way that doesn't feel exploitative or made for popcorn entertainment. In fact, the miniseries doesn't even show the killings, which I think was the right choice. The Witness is able to navigate the events honestly. It's not here to paint Rachel's boyfriend Andre as some faultless hero, or Robert Napper as some monstrous cartoon villain. It's here to show us how these traumatic events can have devastating impacts on real, genuine people. And the reality is that people mess up. They say the wrong thing and they make the wrong choices. And that's certainly the case with Andre, who has to somehow try to move on with his life, whilst trying to raise a young child without his mother. And what makes it even more difficult is having to deal with so much unwanted attention from the press. In fact, with his family receiving so much media attention, Andre decides to pack up and leave the country with his son Alex, first heading to France before settling in Spain. Andre essentially takes them into hiding because he wants his son to live as close to a normal life as possible, and being hounded by the press for interviews is not something that he wants for them. The press are vultures, and they only care about getting quotes to fill the columns. So much so that they don't care whether it makes life hard for the victims of such tragic events. So the fact that The Sun is the only newspaper that's named in the show is certainly fitting, as it has its reputation for good reason. Whilst, understandably, Rachel Nickell and Robert Napper are the main two that people speak of in relation to this case, The Witness largely focuses on Andre, with it showing how these types of crimes don't just impact those that are murdered, but they have significant ramifications on the loved ones. Jordan Bolger as Andre has a lot of screen time, and does most of the heavy lifting. Without a strong performance from him, The Witness would have fallen apart. But thankfully, Jordan Bolger is excellent. This is my first exposure to the actor, but I must say, I was really impressed. He's such an expressive actor, meaning you could really feel the character's pain and anguish. Max Fincham as Alex in his teenage years also impressed, with the character dealing with repressed trauma despite his seeming lack of interest in the case. Alex has anger issues and becomes reckless, getting into fights for no reason and vandalising police cars. Andre doesn't know how to deal with this behaviour, and the relationship between him and his son almost reaches breaking point. This isn't helped by the fact that Andre uses Alex's mum as a weapon to get him to do what he wants. This is such a toxic part of the relationship, but once again it highlights how difficult this situation is. They're both just trying to make the most of a bad situation, but it's just so difficult. When trying to find out exactly what happened when Rachel was murdered, we see the problems that arise when your only witness is a young child. How do you navigate this situation without traumatising the child further? Obviously, you want to find more about the killer because you want justice, but the last thing you want to do is make a young child relive the murder of his own mother. He doesn't want to talk about it, which is understandable, but not only that, you've got to consider how reliable can a child be as a witness? At that age, you barely have a clue about what's going on around you. During the early 90s, this was considered a nearly impossible case to crack, due to there being so little evidence to point towards a killer. In fact, it was described as being like looking for a needle in a haystack. This led to the police using all sorts of investigative techniques in their search for the killer, including getting a psychological profile by criminal psychologist Paul Brittam. This directed the police to focus their suspicion towards a man called Colin Stagg, who fit said profile and regularly walked his dog in the area where Rachel was murdered. They were determined to prove that Stagg was the killer, causing them to tunnel focus. We see them carry out a honeypot exercise in an attempt to elicit a confession from Stagg, but that never happens. Still, when Stagg describes a detail that they believe only could have been known by the killer, that's enough for them to charge him with murder, and he's held in custody until the case goes to trial. However, when Samantha and Jasmine Bissett are brutally murdered not too far away from where Rachel died, and in comparable fashion, the police ignore the similarities between the two cases, as that would mean that they were wrong about Colin Stagg. This highlights how police ego can impede justice, as sometimes they're not willing to accept their own failures. However, what made the situation even worse was that a lot of suffering could have been saved, if not for police incompetence, as Rachel's killer, Robert Napper, should have been in prison already for rape. He'd been able to avoid prison by simply not turning up to give DNA evidence, despite multiple tip-offs that he was the perpetrator of a series of attacks. And when the case against Colin Stagg gets thrown out, it meant that the search for Rachel's killer went cold. Over a decade later, the case is finally reopened, and with advances in DNA technology, the police is able to connect Robert Napper with the killing of Rachel. He's been a patient at Broadmoor Hospital since the mid-90s for the murder of Samantha and Jasmine Bissett, and at the trial, he pleads guilty to the manslaughter of Rachel by diminished responsibility. So finally, Rachel receives some form of justice, but this doesn't take away the pain of what a family have dealt with, or get rid of the trauma. But it does push her loved ones towards a sense of closure. Although, will they ever be able to fully move on? Well, that's impossible for us to say. But the fact that the real Andre and Alex were willing to contribute to this miniseries as consultants shows that they're finally okay to talk about what they've been through. And I've got no doubt that their contributions to The Witness are why this series was done so tactfully. This is true crime done right. Because of that, The Witness gets a thumbs up from me, as it's certainly worth watching. And credit to the writer Rob Williams, director Alex Winkler, as well as the rest of the team involved. So, what did you think of The Witness? And what do you think is the best true crime series ever made? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe for more. And I'll see you next time for another video. Goodbye.